By dawn in late January, the warning signs were no longer abstract. According to public reporting, live feeds from JFK International, LAX, and O'Hare showed terminals turning eerily quiet while markets registered shock before the opening bell. Reportedly, international travel bookings into the United States plunged 90% in 24 hours, and Apple and Tesla slid another 12% in pre-market trading as the Make America Go Away boycott went global. Donald Trump's instinct was to threaten, demand, and seize, but this crisis does not respond to orders. The problem is not diplomacy. It is a choice, multiplied at scale, moving faster than any presidency can control. Late January, before sunrise, the White House confronted a problem that does not negotiate. Reputational collapse moving at consumer speed. According to public reporting, Donald Trump's immediate response was escalation, leaning into Truth Social, doubling down on confrontation, and treating outrage as leverage. Already besieged, reportedly, by the ballroom scandal, the nurse shooting fallout, and the Japan bond crash, he pushed harder as if pressure could restore control. At 6, Chugo AM. Eastern, reportedly, live security feeds from JFK International in New York, LAX in Los Angeles, and O'Hare in Chicago showed terminals unusually empty for a Friday morning. Airports do not trend, they register behavior. When gates sit quiet, the consequences are already in motion. The second scene came from markets that price fear before politicians can name it. According to public reporting, Apple and Tesla slid another 12% in pre-market trading as the Make America Go Away boycott gained traction. Investors were not reacting to a single headline. They were reacting to the idea that the United States had become unpredictable on purpose. In my view, this is where Trump's leadership style stops looking tough and starts looking expensive. Trump's miscalculation was simple and severe. He assumed the global backlash was mostly rhetorical and that allies could be pressured back into line after his reported insult tweet describing European leaders as vassals and his threat to annex Greenland. But the blind spot was a choice. You can compel a government to sign a document. You cannot compel millions of customers to spend against their own disgust. Adversarial framing matters here. Trump tried to command a marketplace he does not own, and he is discovering that sovereignty is not the same thing as demand. When a president turns reputation into a weapon, he also turns it into a target. As cancellations spread and confidence drains, the corridor of options narrows into a single reality. This gets worse faster than any statement can fix. The boycott did not spread like a diplomatic dispute. It spread like a product trend fast, social, and indifferent to official channels. According to public reporting, it began in Denmark after Trump's threat to annex Greenland, then took shape in Copenhagen as a viral challenge called We're Bye-Bye USA. The mechanics were mundane on purpose. Influencers filmed themselves canceling Netflix subscriptions, swapping Coca-Cola for local sodas, returning Levi's jeans, and steering vacations away from Florida. That banality is the point. A movement is harder to stop when it looks like ordinary shopping. Within days, reportedly, the wave moved to France. Cafes in Paris posted handwritten signs, "No American products served here," while videos of Nike returns flooded TikTok. The hashtag Sansa Marie Without America surged across the Eurozone, and the story shifted from protest to participation. In my view, this is where Trump's problem becomes structural. You can rebut a critic, but you cannot rebut a crowd that is turned away. Then it hit Asia, where symbolism becomes market behavior with frightening speed. According to public reporting, South Korea and Japan, U.S. allies reportedly angered by Trump's protection racket, comments saw the boycott turn corporate. Samsung stores in Seoul rolled out overnight trade-in offers for iPhones, paired with a blunt tagline, "Switch to stability, switch to respect." It was not just a campaign. It was a signal to consumers that abandoning American brands could feel practical, not ideological. And while street-level boycotts create headlines, organized labor creates bottlenecks. According to public reporting, the International Transport Workers Federation, ITF, representing 20 million transport workers, held an emergency vote in London and passed a resolution in solidarity with American nurses and the victims of state violence in Minneapolis. The tactic was described as constructive delays. In Rotterdam and Hamburg, dock workers reportedly began inspecting every container from the United States, turning minutes into days. In Vancouver and Montreal, Canadian longshoremen already furious about lumber tariffs, joined by refusing to load Canadian goods onto US-bound trains. Adversarial framing is unavoidable. Trump treated alliances like transactions, and now the transaction costs are being raised by people he cannot sanction. The presidency can issue threats, but it cannot speed up a dock worker's hands. By the time Walmart and Target were reportedly warning about empty shelves, the boycott had already evolved into something more dangerous than a slogan, a system-wide choke that only tightens with time. Friday, late January, the boycott stopped being a story about sentiment and became a story about infrastructure. According to public reporting, the first visible sign was not a speech or a vote. It was motion disappearing from places designed to never stop moving. Airports, ports, warehouses, booking engines, trading screens. High-attention reality number one is that reputations do not decline gradually when the network effect flips. They drop like a switch. High-attention reality number two is that once logistics slows, the economy does not argue back. It waits, then it breaks. High-attention reality number three is that Trump's presidency was built on the idea that pressure creates obedience. And this crisis is built on the opposite idea. Withdrawal creates leverage. At 6:20 a.m. Eastern, reportedly, terminal feeds at JFK International, LAX, and O'Hare looked wrong for a Friday. It is not just empty seats. It is the absence of the people who normally connect money to movement. International tourists, business travelers, cargo crews. According to public reporting, international travel bookings into the United States plunged 90% in 24 hours, and hotel operators in Miami reported 80% cancellations for February. Las Vegas was described as quiet. Disney World was described as unusually empty. Tourism is one of the fastest ways a reputational shock becomes payroll pain, because it hits local economies without waiting for Congress, and it leaves receipts. Now the viewer is standing inside the place where the boycott becomes operational, Rotterdam. According to public reporting, dock workers began inspecting every container coming from the United States, and the phrase used was constructive delays. In normal times, a container becomes a barcode scan and a forklift movement measured in minutes. In this version of events, it becomes a slow ritual. Doors opened, pallets checked, items counted, safety re-verified. Reportedly, what used to take minutes took days. Soybeans sat in damp air. Cars and machinery sat in the salt wind. The point was not destruction. The point was time. And time is a weapon when it is applied to a supply chain built on just-in-time assumptions. Hamburg was pulled into the same pattern, according to public reporting, and then the pressure widened across borders. In Vancouver and Montreal, Canadian longshoremen already furious about lumber tariffs reportedly refused to load Canadian goods onto US-bound trains. The Canada blockade discussed earlier in the week, according to public reporting, expanded toward maritime choke points. This is how a boycott becomes a choke, not by banning a product, but by turning friction into a constant. Inside the United States, the consequences arrived as warnings first, then as behavior. According to public reporting, Walmart and Target were already warning of empty shelves by next week. By Monday, reportedly, panic buying had begun. Medicine, electronics, car parts, the items that reveal what people fear losing. The boycott did something Trump could not spin away. It pulled foreign policy into the American living room. It is one thing to argue about Greenland on television. It is another thing to find out insulin is stuck on a ship in Rotterdam. Trump's instinct, according to public reporting, was to threaten escalation talk of banning European ships from U.S. waters, talk of seizing cargo, talk of forcing the European Union to make citizens buy American goods. That is the adversarial truth at the center of Part 3. Trump treated coercion as a universal tool, and he misread who owns the system he is trying to coerce. If he bans European ships, according to public reporting, the United States starves itself, importing roughly 40% of medical supplies and high-tech components. In my view, this is the clearest sign of narrowing options. A president starts issuing threats that punish his own side first. Then the camera moves from docks to boardrooms, where pressure becomes policy without ever passing a legislature. According to public reporting citing leaks at the Financial Times, a secret video conference took place yesterday afternoon with the CEOs of the Global 50. The list reportedly included Unilever, Nestle, Toyota, Siemens, LVMH, HSBC, and major global banks. The topic was blunt: de-risking America. Their logic, reportedly, was not ideology, it was volatility management. The United States had been treated as a safe harbor for decades, the place capital goes when the rest of the world feels unstable. Now, according to public reporting, executives discussed treating it as a conflict zone. This is the second viewer in the scene moment, a call where nobody raises their voice, but billions of dollars shift direction. According to public reporting, the plan described was a silent withdrawal, no press releases, no dramatic exits, just a quiet repositioning. Cancel a factory expansion in Ohio. Move R&D to Toronto or London. Reduce inventory in U.S. warehouses. Delay hiring, reprice insurance, quietly reroute supply contracts. This is not a crash, reportedly. It is a suffocation. It is also something Trump cannot litigate or tweet into submission because it is distributed across firms, committees, and quarterly incentives. The third viewer in the scene moment is inside Washington as the boycott reaches the sector. Trump needs most to keep the surface calm: big tech. According to public reporting, the European Union's anti-coercion instrument, ACI, became a threat that terrified Silicon Valley. If Europe blocks U.S. data transfers, reportedly, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft face immediate disruption across a region that represents a large share of revenue. And because markets trade the future, not the past, even the possibility of that disruption changes behavior. According to public reporting, tech leaders Musk, Zuckerberg, Cook were in an emergency meeting at the White House. The subtext was not loyalty, it was exposure. Fix the crisis or the market absorbs the cost. Reportedly, Elon Musk posted a cryptic meme on X, a sinking ship with the caption, "Abandon." If that turn is real, it matters because the tech ecosystem does not just reflect public mood, it amplifies it. Trump's political strength depends on attention, and attention is governed by systems he does not command. At the same time, according to public reporting, travel advisories widened. New Zealand raised its threat level for the U.S. to high risk, reportedly in a category associated with countries like Turkey or Colombia, citing civil unrest and risk to foreign nationals. Germany warned citizens to avoid protests and be cautious around federal law enforcement, according to public reporting. These notices do more than scare tourists. They force corporations to update duty of care policies, insurers to reprice, and universities to pause exchanges. The boycott became an administrative reality. The final time pressure is the one Washington fears most because it is outside Washington. Today's BRICS emergency session. According to public reporting, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa discussed coordinated moves that would reduce exposure to the U.S. dollar. The dollar index DXY was described as dropping sharply, and the narrative hardened into something Trump cannot dismiss as a bad headline. Once reserve confidence starts to wobble, the cost of borrowing rises, the politics of austerity arrives, and every domestic fight becomes more brittle. This is where control versus ownership becomes the climax. Trump can posture, threaten, and demand. He can order agencies to draft memos. He can post on Truth Social. But he cannot own consumer disgust, dock worker leverage, boardroom risk committees, travel advisory language, or the compliance regimes of multinational platforms. According to public reporting, Americans living abroad began reporting refusals of service and disrupted banking, flooding U.S. embassies for help as diplomacy froze. Even if every detail is debated, the mechanism is clear. Isolation is contagious when the incentive to reconnect disappears. The world is not attacking America with tanks. It is withdrawing the permissions that make America function. And once that withdrawal becomes profitable for everyone else, it stops being a protest and becomes a new default that only tightens. Once a boycott reaches infrastructure, it stops behaving like a political storm and starts behaving like institutional memory. Markets remember volatility, logistics systems remember delays, corporate boards remember reputational risk, and governments remember the cost of being tied to a partner that feels unpredictable. According to public reporting, what began as a viral Make America Go Away challenge quickly pushed into the language of travel advisories, port inspections, and quiet investment decisions. That shift matters more than any trending hashtag because it creates paper trails inside organizations that do not reverse themselves quickly. There is a brutal logic to reputational shocks. They force risk repricing across an entire system. According to public reporting, when the European Union signaled tools like the anti-coercion instrument ACI, it wasn't just a diplomatic threat. It was a compliance problem for companies built on cross-border data and routine permissions. The moment a corporation has to ask, will our data transfers hold next quarter, it starts to plan around the answer it fears. In my view, this is where Trump's narrowing corridor becomes visible in a new way. He is no longer negotiating policy outcomes. He is negotiating the world's tolerance for uncertainty under his name. The danger is not collapse. The danger is fragility. Fragility is what happens when a system can still stand, but only if nothing else goes wrong. According to public reporting, the boycott bypassed traditional tools of statecraft because it was not a government ban. It was behavior, customers canceling trips, workers slowing containers, companies shifting capital. The WTO can arbitrate tariffs and quotas. It cannot force a French teenager to buy Nike, or a Dutch dock worker to scan faster, or a corporate risk committee to approve a new factory built in a market it no longer trusts. That is why Trump's usual playbook, threats, deals, pressure, hits a wall. The mechanisms that are tightening around him are voluntary, distributed, and legally mundane. Adversarial framing is the only honest lens here. Trump built his leverage on the assumption that America's brand would absorb any shock, and he spent that reputation like it was infinite. The bill for that spending arrives as administrative decisions. Travel warnings, insurance premiums, supply contracts rewritten, university exchanges paused, board approvals delayed, inventory reduced. None of it looks dramatic on television. All of it is measurable in balance sheets. When trust becomes the variable, the economy does not crash. It quietly refuses to extend credit. In the short term, Trump can still try to shout the system back into obedience, but the direction of travel has changed, and every additional outburst raises the price of re-entry for anyone considering coming back. There is a temptation in Washington to treat a reputational crisis as a messaging problem, because messaging is what politics knows how to do. But according to public reporting, this moment is not being driven by a single government decision that can be reversed with a signature. It is being driven by distributed choices, customers, unions, corporate boards, and regulators, each acting on their own incentives. That reality forces a narrower question. What can Trump actually change fast enough to slow the damage, and what is already locked in? The first path is de-escalation by rhetoric, because rhetoric is the cheapest input available to a president. According to public reporting, Trump was reportedly frantically calling Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, signaling a willingness to soften positions, including talk of dropping Greenland demands and easing tariff posture. But credibility is not restored by a single call. It is restored by a pattern that convinces others the volatility has ended. In my view, this is Trump's core trap. He needs immediate relief, but trust is paid back slowly. The second path is administrative containment. That means stabilizing the points where panic becomes everyday hardship, shipping timelines, medical supply flows, and retail availability. Yet even that runs into the same constraint. Ports in Rotterdam and Hamburg do not take orders from Washington, and Canadian longshoremen in Vancouver and Montreal do not respond to American political threats. Trump can attempt counter-sanctions, but the more he weaponizes trade, the more he teaches the world that de-risking America was rational in the first place. So the cleanest way to end this story is to watch the signals that cannot be faked. Signal 1, travel advisories. If New Zealand and Germany maintain elevated warnings, the tourism drag persists, and Miami, Las Vegas, and the broader visitor economy continue bleeding quietly. Signal 2, port handling times. If constructive delays remain the default in Rotterdam, the supply chain stays strained, and panic buying becomes a recurring cycle. Signal 3, corporate capital decisions. If the Global 50 logic holds quietly shifting R&D to Toronto or London, reducing inventory in U.S. warehouses, then the slowdown becomes structural rather than emotional. Signal 4, EU ACI posture. If cross-border data permissions remain threatened, pressure on Facebook, Google, and Microsoft compounds. Signal 5, the dollar's confidence indicators including DXY, because a sustained slide changes everything from borrowing costs to political stability. Adversarial framing remains unavoidable. Trump tried to rule the world's behavior with threats, and he is learning that the world can simply refuse the relationship. A presidency can demand loyalty, but it cannot demand loyalty. If you want the next chapter, as these signals update ports, markets, advisories, and boardroom decisions, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the real story is not the slogan. It is what systems do when they decide they are done.